Indigenous Sami languages and cultures. I have worked with Sami languages and cultures in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland and also Sami youth.
And next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Kobe. I'm from the Ogiek Indigenous community in Kenya. And I'm also a lawyer. I'm an Indigenous lawyer. And I am the chair of the Ogiek Youth Council, which is also known as Tirap Youth Trust, which is an Indigenous youth organization based in Kenya. And I'm happy to be here and be part of this panel.
Hokolovalte Urotikta localita Europa, Alemania. Javi Eleazar, mi nombre es Eleazar, soy indígena celtal de la familia mayense del estado de Chiapas, México. Y soy especialista en agroecología y un gusto estar aquí entre ustedes.
Hello, warm greetings. I am Kiryo Wetsa from the northeast part of India. I belong to the indigenous community called Nagas. Currently, I am a PhD student at the University of Hamburg. Thank you.
Thank you, and warmly welcome to you also. Now, our first speaker is going to be Sara Läpuerre.
Hiihtuu. Thank you. So, to give you a little context where I'm coming from, Sápmi is an area of Sami people. It's a region where Sami people traditionally live. It's an area that covers the northern parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Kola Peninsula in Russia. During this presentation, I'm going to be talking about two main topics. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about the climate crisis. And secondly, I'm going to talk about green colonialism. Those two are really much connected with each other, so maybe it's easier when I start with the climate crisis that is touching us all. If you were here in the Ecumenical Youth Gathering in the first day, there was a presentation, a plenary. There was another Sami here speaking, Lovisa Mienna Sjöberg. I don't know if you remember her, but if you remember, you know maybe a little about Sami people already. So she talked about Sami wisdom. It is, don't take more than you need. It concerns the nature, what we take from the land, the earth. It could be, now it's the berry picking season in our homeland. So we don't take more berries than we need. We don't hunt more than we need. We don't fish from the rivers and the lakes and the sea more than we need. And what we take, we use it all. There is nothing that we take that is going to waste. We try to respect that way the earth and the land that has given those things to us. We as indigenous people know how to live sustainably. We know how to live in the way that the next generations will have a chance to survive too, will have the resources for them to survive. We see every day these news about the climate crisis, and it's terrifying for us all, but especially for us indigenous youth. Because we see that the future is taken away from us. We live by the land and the waters. They give life. They are the source of food and livelihood. As it was said yesterday in the beautiful poem, and I heard it today also, we don't have the land, we are the land. So, if there is no land, how do we live? How can we be connected to the land if we do not have the land anymore for us? That's the question concerning land rights with indigenous people. And I think that could be one way to protect us against climate crisis, to think that we don't take more than we need. We only take what is needed, and we use it wisely. I come from fishing Sami community. During summertime, salmon is the most important fish that we are fishing from our river. 2 summers ago, the salmon fishing was prohibited because the salmon were disappearing from our rivers. And we have been there fishing for a long time, so we are wondering, how is this happening? We know how to take care of our land and waters, so why is the salmon disappearing now? We, as indigenous people, have the right to practice our traditional livelihoods, but that right is now taken away from us in many places. We can't practice our livelihoods anymore the same way we were able to do that for hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of years. Then the other topic, green colonialism. When we try to find the solutions to climate crisis, we often talk about sustainable ways to produce energy. Those are, for example, the solar power or wind farms, water power. And those are taking away the land away from us. When we talk about green colonialism, we mean that the lands are taken away from us again for the good of sustainable development. But can it be really sustainable if we take it away from the people that have taken good care of the lands and waters for thousands of years? There are many natural resources in the areas of indigenous people. We know that in the areas where we are living, there are many minerals that are being mined. There is oil, forests, water, everything. And these areas of indigenous communities are seen as empty land or wilderness. A land that nobody is using or taking care of or profiting yes, profiting from. So those lands are seen as something that can be taken away from us because nobody is using them. There is nobody living in there. But we say in the Sami land that every place has its name. Every place has its purpose that it serves for us and we serve for them. So it is not empty land. It is not something that can be just taken away from us because it's not used. We are using the lands. We are taking care of the lands. But it's the view that is it's not used for common good or economics. So it must be free for use. I think I will stop now, that other speakers can have their
Now I would like to introduce one more speaker. It's a long way from Pacific, we all know that. So would you like to say something about you, about yourself, introduce yourself briefly?
Okay, I'm sorry about this. My name is Brenda Rumoropen. I come from West Papua. It's in Indonesia, and I represent the Papuan people.
Okay, so next we have Cindy, please.
Thank you, Mari. And before I start my presentation, I sent a video. I don't know if the communication team can project it.
Okay, we will continue maybe with Kyria, and let's see if we can show this video maybe a little bit later on. Kyria.
I need the
Kyria's PowerPoints. Okay. Shortly, we will see Kyria's slides.
Yeah, thank you so much for this time, and I'm privileged and honored to be sitting here this afternoon and to speak some of my perspective on the IP's land rights. As I've said, this is more or less my perspective, so you have every right to disagree with my views as well. So for the IPs, irrespective of who we are, when we see these paddy fields, the mountains, no matter from which part of the world we belong, we always look back to our land with a deep feeling of oneness, a feeling that transcends borders and identities. And for us, this is the biggest blessing being an IPs. So, as I've shown here, this is the statistic as per the government publication in 2011. This is the latest one we have from the side of the government. The indigenous people are often described as the original settlers of the land. We are characterized by distinct culture, language, ethics, and moral values, and even religion in some cases. And we are also self-reliant in defense and politics. I would like to speak on 3 points, that is on identity issues and ingenuity. For the IPs of Northeast India, especially the Nagas, the land is the center of life, relationship, and communication. Hence, we are land-centered people. For this reason, land is important because it goes beyond the economic resources. It gives us identity, a sense of belonging, that is the unity among our people. And it is from land our identity, our culture, religion, and politics are derived. Thus, the IP land rights should matter to the non-IPs because it signifies the IP's identity, survival, and experiences. When we look at the creation of God, the question of what is God's purpose in creation ultimately comes in, or what is the goal of creation. The same question which has been asked biblically can have its connection with the IP's perspective of nature. Our people, we have great reference for nature. We personify nature as having a life in them and also as part of the supreme. Similarly, the psalmist charges all creation to praise and worship the Creator as it is their first and basic moral duty. Under this reality, though one may not be able to articulate how creation apart from human praises the Maker, yet there's a language of fullness in creation for God's glory. Likewise, according to our worldview, land is sacred because it is considered a gift of God and as part of the supreme. Thus, we have high reference for it. Land has been personified as having a life in it. Thus, this worldview has a theological connotation because we view land as parts of God's glory, and in considering the needs of stewardship of God's creation today, we are regenerating the IP's identity in ecumenical journey towards restoring wholeness in creation. Today, some genuine issues need to be addressed, a pertinent threat to the youth of today, the children, and the future generations to come. The IPs in some parts of India are having a serious issue because of industrialization, constructing dams, mining, and others. Many IPs are marginalized laborers in their own land, serving the non-IPs who have confiscated their land by force or without proper rehabilitation. For instance, we have the Naxalism. It was started in West Bengal, and the movement slowly spread across the eastern India in less developed areas of rural central and eastern India, such as Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and Andhra Pradesh. It rapidly found roots among displaced tribes and natives who are fighting against exploitation at the hands of major Indian corporations. No proper settlements were provided for the displaced tribals. Many of them were forced to live in peripheries or to migrate to the adjoining states to work as unskilled labor under the conditions of poverty. So the migration of these IPs who have lost their land to urban areas caused not only psychological problems but also an identity crisis. We have another issue that is illegal immigration and IPs. One instance is the IPs in the state of Tripura, which is also in the northeast part of India, has a serious issue of illegal immigration. It has reached a point where they have not only occupied their land, but also controls the political and economic power of the state. And at this pace, this is a distant relative for the other IPs in the northeast India. Another issue is the issue of climate change. Climate change has directly and indirectly affected the land. Not all, but many of the IPs are suffering the consequences of climate change, something which they have not created or have less contributed. Issue of recognition. Rather than recognizing the contribution and values of the IPs, the culturally driven religious political issues in India attempts to distort the IP's history and experiences. And as for me, I'm considered a foreigner in my own country. This simply signifies the ignorance that the IPs are the original settler of the land and we are a part of the nation. And I have another issues that need to be addressed to the indigenous people as well. As per my context, there is a dimensional transition from self-sustenance to commercial-based IP community. This is the hallmark of IPs, which is our relationship with the land, which our relationship with the land might be put at risk from within. Therefore, it is also important for the IP communities in this ecumenical journey that we deconstruct the dichotomy between truth, the ethos, and the practice, which is our context now. We need to see if our discussions are addressing the grassroots as well. Ingenuity. Those in the ecumenical platform must make sense to the IPs outside our platform, must make sense to the non-IPs. In a country where the government may be dedicated towards certain groups, that is the non-IPs, we need to seek for global political advocacy, irrespective of the IPs or the non-IPs. By extending solidarity, we are strengthening ourselves, because restoring wholeness in creation is a collaborative ministry or responsibility. Thus, there is a need to retrospect and revisit the traditional ethos and values on them, not only for the sake of the IP, but more importantly for the non-IPs to learn from us. Thus, in order to preserve the rich cultural heritage, there is a need for proper documentation and research, which is lacking in my context. Yeah, it's toward the ending now. So this is my village, and I am a minority in my own village. Sometimes we have territorial disputes where we don't have enough people to represent us in courts. So we seek people who are close to us, we seek their help. And they have become the voice of the voiceless, which I'm facing. However, sadly, after the issues are settled, these people are the ones who come to us to detect us and who come to claim that they must be the co-owners of the land because they have helped us. How insignificant this experience may be at the level of World Ecumenical Forum, yet our world continues to struggle to make choice between the have and the have-not, and alone racial terms. I'm often skeptical with the idea of the voice of the voiceless. The overarching idea of the voice of the voiceless can often be discriminatory at times without empowerment to self-determination. Just because we are determined to be the voice of the voiceless, that should not give us the right to detect on others, that is the voiceless. Lastly, it is through the love of Christ that we are here. And it is only through the love of Christ that we are all made equal, whether the rich or the poor, or irrespective of our identities and racial group. May this strength, that is the love of Christ, ignite in all of us, that we will see our fellow sufferings as ours. Thank you.
Brenda, you're the next.
Oh, can I have my presentation? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It is such an honor to be able, to sit here together with all of you and to represent my brothers and sisters in Papua. I will start my presentation with a very popular saying that the Indonesian uses all the time in their beginning of their introduction. It says "tak kenal maka tak sayang." You can't love if you don't know something about it. Like if you don't know about something. Sorry. How can you love me if you don't know something about me or my culture? So, since one of the main theme of this assembly is love, last night, as I was preparing for today, one statement that that caught my attention was, love will move the world toward reconciliation and unity. It is said by Reverend McCormick, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So then Mark 12, verse 30 to 31st reminds us that love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. We love God because we know him. So how can you love me and my culture if you don't know anything about me and my culture? So I want to encourage all of us to get to know my people and the culture in West Papua as we talk about the issues and struggles that we face as Papuan indigenous youth. We need to restore the wholeness in creation, right? Meaning that something has been broken. As one of the speaker has talked about previously in their talk yesterday, yeah, and today as well. And for the Papuan indigenous youth, the relationship and the connection to the forest and the land has been broken. And we need to restore that relationship and connection. But for I go on with the issues and the struggles, let me first show, I'll ask this. Do you guys know where is Papua? Can you raise your hand if you know where West Papua is? Okay, good. Can you raise your right foot if you don't know? Just kidding. Okay, so can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So where is West Papua? This is for those who don't know. Just kidding. But yeah, West Papua is in the archipelago of Indonesia, as you can see. West Papua is the most eastern part of the city, of the island in the country. In next slide. Okay, so in the west side of the island, we have our sister island, Maluku, and then in the south side of the island, we have the Arafura Sea, and then in the east side of the island, we have our sister country, Papua New Guinea, and above is the Pacific Ocean in the north. Okay. Next slide. So in West Papua, we have more than 250 tribes. And they're all occupied from the top of the island till and all around the island, yeah. And when all of these tribes sharing this island, I'm sure that you will think or maybe even see already the issues or the struggles that we're going to have. And in West Papua, there are 7 regions we call Wilayah Adat Papua, where it is all the tribes are divided or being put in a group because they share similarity in their culture and in their physical appearance and yeah, their traditions. They share similarities, and yeah. Yeah, what I want to say is because of those shared similarities, these different tribes, they are put together in a way that all the borders and the land and the forests are divided based on their authority on the land. And so we already see this issue of for the indigenous people, especially for the Papuan indigenous youth. Yeah, the Papuan indigenous youth are on the brink of losing their own culture, our own culture. We will lose our identity because we are deeply influenced by other cultures. In this case, the Malay culture. Yeah. And also, the education system is a part of why we are losing our culture. And this has caused the Papuan indigenous youth to be disconnected from the forest and the land. Therefore, as the Papuan indigenous youth, we need to deeply understand or to be rooted in our own identity and traditions. And we need to, because we own the land, right? We need to, we cannot let the system change us, but we need to change the system. And that is something that the Papuan indigenous youth need to believe in themselves. And that's something that we are seeing right now, that they're losing their culture and their identity. And one of the example is the language. I come from one of the tribe called Biak, and it's in the, if you see on the map, it's in the Saireri part. So, but then I was born and grew up in another region in the orange part of the map, yeah, Tabi. And being born outside of my my tribe and being put in the system, the education system, I have lost my identity as Biak people, which is the language. Yeah, I'm really ashamed that I cannot speak my tribal language, and that is something that I want to change. I want to be able to speak my language, and in order to do so, I need to, I need to believe in myself. I need to also tell my other fellow Papuan youth to believe in themselves, that they can change the system and be deeply rooted in their own identity. Next slide. Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to restore the connection and the relationship, and we need to believe in ourselves, in as a youth, indigenous, that we are going to change the system. Next slide. Again. So my recommendations for the leaders, the ecumenical movement, and all the church leaders, we need to enforce customary laws, especially on banning the selling of the land to other people. And also we need to set up indigenous education. And one of the example is that we've already created a school called Papua Indigenous University, and we're hoping to, to encourage our Papuan youth to be rooted, to know their own identity too. Yeah, and also we need to create more traditional villages, and Kampung Yobo is one of the example that one of the leaders in Papua is trying to make. I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next speaker will be Cindy.
Thank you, Mari. The video that I wanted to be projected was a video from Nigeria. The video showed the lives of the Ogoni people, how their lives have been changing since they started mining. They don't have water, they don't have drinking water, they don't have food, they're hungry and they live in their mud houses. That's just an example of one indigenous community in Africa that is suffering from the historical land injustices, that is suffering from all the effects of the companies who are coming to develop on indigenous land. They're coming to develop on indigenous land and they're not getting anything in return. For example, if let's talk about Congo. Congo is a country it's a very rich country. It has a lot of minerals, but as you can see, the community itself is suffering. They don't have any food. There's a lot of poverty, and they're still one of the poorest countries. There's a lot of gold mining there, but the community does not get even a single cent from all this. And this is just one of the many indigenous communities that are suffering in Africa. Myself, I come from an indigenous community called the Ogek people. The Ogek people, it's a hunter-gatherer community, and we live in the Mau Forest. Mau Forest is one of the largest indigenous forests in our country, and it's a water tower. And since I was born, I've been seeing my community, I've been seeing my family members being evicted from this land. I have slowly seen my community's identity disappearing. When I was growing up, when I was younger, we used to go to my grandmother's house so that they can transfer. I'm sorry. So that they can transfer the indigenous knowledge and indigenous language from her generation to my generation. And since then, it all stopped. I used to speak the language. Like years ago, I used to speak the language when I was younger, but as I grew older, life itself, I just lost my connection with the land. This is because of this countless eviction that we are having. I've seen my family members leaving their home, the land that they've known as their own. And I've seen them live in a small piece of land, and their grandmothers have been living there, their heritage is there, their culture, everything is in the land, as my fellow speakers have spoken about. And for Africans, most of Africans present here might call themselves indigenous. Most Africans call themselves, they say that we are all indigenous, but that's not really the case. Because they have not faced the severe marginalization. They have not been dispossessed of their ancestral lands. They have not been, their rights and freedoms have not been inaccessible. So it is unfair for any African to call themselves indigenous, and they're not indigenous. And people need to understand the meaning of the word indigenous from an African perspective. So we have very many indigenous communities in Africa. We have the pastoral communities, we have the fisher folk communities, and we have the hunter-gatherer community where I come from. And these indigenous communities, they experience a lot of dispossession, they experience forced removals and discrimination, and this is evident across the globe. From West Papua to the Sami, to Asia and Latin America. So, and indigenous people have not let this happen. They have been fighting this struggle. They have been reacting towards this dispossession of their land. And most of the reason why indigenous communities in Africa face these challenges is because of, they say that people are evicted from their lands in the name of conservation or in the name of development. When they say when an indigenous territory is not developed, the development is seen as for lack of a better word, when there is development, they cut the trees, they build the roads, and on the other hand, you're hurting the land, you're hurting the fruits of our Creator, you're hurting our foods, our food system, our indigenous land, our indigenous food systems, and also conservation, the agro industries, the commercial plantation, mineral exploitation, mining of coal. We also have mining of gold, of oil, and other economic activities. And an example is what is happening in Tanzania with the Maasai people. The Maasai people have been evicted from their, I don't know if anyone has seen this, but it was all over the news. We have seen that there's a lot of lives that have been lost. They are now homeless in their own home. So, and how can the church support the struggle for indigenous people's rights? And the church needs to seek reconciliation with indigenous people in finding ways to ensure that the land is given back to the rightful owners, to the rightful, and that is us, our indigenous people. And once we are given back the land, we'll be able to continue building our legacies for our children, for our children's children, to avoid the breaking of the knowledge transfer from one generation to the other. And I will quote ILO's constitution, and they stated that universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice and privatization to large numbers of people who can produce unrest so great that the peace and harmony of the world are imperiled. And there can be no reconciliation without justice. There can be no reconciliation without land justice, without indigenous land rights justice. Justice for all indigenous peoples, justice for the youth, climate justice, and justice in general. And I will leave it there, Mary. I have some.
Thank you for respecting the time. So, Eleazar.
Hay poco tiempo y quiero hablar muchas cosas, pero trataré de ser concreto. Voy a hablar sobre la defensa de los territorios y el cambio climático. Yo soy indígena celtal de la familia mayense en Chiapas, México. Y dentro de esta defensa de los territorios voy a abordar cómo ha sido despojado los territorios de los pueblos a lo largo de 500 años. Y pues como saben, México fue colonizado o invadido por los españoles, y junto con esta invasión llegó el cristianismo. El cristianismo nos enseñó todas las prácticas ancestrales o los saberes ancestrales eran diabólicas, ¿no? Eso también la Iglesia ha contribuido en el despojo de las identidades, en el despojo de las espiritualidades hacia los pueblos indígenas. 200 años después llegó el protestantismo. Hace 200 años llegó el protestantismo en México, desde el norte, desde Estados Unidos. Y decían, no, la verdadera salvación, la verdadera religión es esta, es la nuestra. Y nos enseñaron que lo importante es el cielo y no la tierra. Y eso también fue parte de ese despojo de las espiritualidades. La religión ha formado parte del despojo de las espiritualidades de los pueblos originarios. Y también quiero abordar la educación. También ha sido parte de este cambio de las identidades. Yo recuerdo que cuando empecé a estudiar, me metieron a la primaria y en la escuela nos enseñaron que el agua era un recurso, que nos metieron en la cabeza que las bondades de la naturaleza son recursos naturales. Y para los pueblos originarios no son recursos, son bondades, son seres vivos. Y entonces la educación también ha contribuido en el despojo de las identidades. Y entonces ha sido un proceso de despojo de identidades, pero también de descampesinización, ¿no? Y entonces este despojo de identidades hacia los pueblos originarios poco a poco ha contribuido en que, como ya mencionaron algunos de mis compañeras y compañeros, este desarraigo de las identidades. Está también la discriminación en México. Hace 23 años, en el 94, antes del 94, decían en México que ya no había pueblos indígenas. Y entonces, a través del levantamiento zapatista, el pueblo mexicano volteó a mirar hacia los pueblos originarios. Y entonces, en México, los pueblos originarios solo son valorados en los museos. Si quieres conocer la realidad, ve a un museo y entonces allí los pueblos originarios son respetados y todo, pero en el contexto no son, están marginados, son despojados de su cultura. Y entonces esta marginación pues parte de un sistema. No podemos hablar de reconciliación con la creación si no abordamos el sistema capitalismo o el capitalismo como tal. No podemos hablar de reconciliación, tenemos que abordar este tema del capitalismo. ¿Por qué? Porque todos sabemos y nos han hablado del cambio climático, pero el cambio climático no es el centro. Hay muchas problemáticas, está la minería, como ya han mencionado, está la contaminación del agua, está el despojo de los territorios por empresas transnacionales y aprovechando que estamos en Alemania, voy a compartir que también Audi, que es una empresa que ocasiona grandes impactos ambientales en México. Y entonces, a mí me llama la atención que no podemos mover las sillas acá, pero allá pueden hacer muchas cosas, ¿no? Y lo mismo, en Canadá no podemos cazar o matar ni un animal, pero acaban y arrasan con toda la biodiversidad que hay en Latinoamérica. Entonces son contradicciones, ¿no? Los contextos de los pueblos originarios y, como ya han mencionado mis compañeros, son distintos. No son los mismos contextos con los pueblos originarios del sur que del norte, son contextos diferentes, pero lo que sí yo quiero resaltar es que el sistema capitalista está arrastrando con toda esta biodiversidad, con la vida, y entonces no podemos mirar y no podemos construir una vida buena, abundante, como también dice la Biblia, una vida plena, si seguimos con este sistema mundo que es atroz, que es un monstruo. Y la pregunta no es que si el sistema capitalista está decayendo o ya está acabando. La pregunta es si el planeta va a aguantar todos estos atropellos, ¿no? Y entonces eso debemos pensar como jóvenes y en los pueblos originarios. Se está dialogando, se está pensando, se está repensando estas maneras de ver la vida, de volver a recuperar nuestros saberes, nuestra identidad. Es cierto, los pueblos originarios tienen mucho que aportar, pero también recordar que los pueblos originarios, como mencioné desde un principio, han sido despojados de las identidades y poco a poco dejado a través de los años su cosmovisión, pero como pueblos originarios y como juventud es un desafío, y no solo para los jóvenes indígenas, sino para todos. Debemos mirar hacia dónde va encaminado el mundo, ¿no? Y entonces también quiero hablar un poco de lo que ya han mencionado, de este nuevo modelo de economías verdes. No sé si han escuchado, si han escuchado de estas economías verdes, pero por ejemplo organismos internacionales como la ONU, hace como un mes, 2 meses estaban hablando de minerías sustentables, ¿no? Que también eso es preocupante. El término de la sostenibilidad o de la sustentabilidad también está afectando a los pueblos originarios, y en esta asamblea queremos decir que pues organismos internacionales que están hablando de una supuesta minería sustentable, eso es mentira. No hay minería sustentable, ¿no? No hay sustentabilidad, porque todo arrasan. Y entonces queremos decir eso y alzar la voz de que pues el concepto de sustentabilidad y sostenibilidad está también arrasando con las comunidades indígenas. Y quiero acabar con un símbolo. Estoy buscando mi morralito, debe estar por ahí. Bueno, lo siento. Sí. Perdón. ¿Tú tienes lo siento, traigo muchas cosas. Acá está. Esto es un símbolo que traigo desde los pueblos. Nos enseñaron que esto es malo, que esto es un atraso del desarrollo, que los plásticos, que los botes es lo bueno, lo mejor. Y esto es una fruta que utilizaban nuestros ancestros para beber agua, para tomar agua, y el mundo está lleno de plásticos ahora, ¿no? Y entonces en nuestras asambleas también utilizamos plásticos. El mundo nos está metiendo en este proceso de consumismo, pero desde los pueblos originarios estamos recuperando prácticas ancestrales como esto. Esto es un recipiente que pues no es plástico, se siembra, se reproduce, y pues si lo tiramos no pasa nada, se transforma en abono, y entonces no pasa nada. Pero la contaminación con las basuras es increíble en el mundo, y entonces como jóvenes de los pueblos originarios también estamos tratando de recuperar estas otras maneras de consumir lo nuestro, de consumir, de volver a resembrar lo que los abuelos hacían. Y entonces también les invito a ustedes, quizás en las ciudades es un poco más complicado, pero tratemos de reducir, ¿no? Esta forma de consumir tanto los plásticos, y nos hacen, como les decía, tenemos que hablar del sistema mundo, porque nos hacen ser culpables. En México decían, solo tienes 1 minuto o 20 litros de agua para bañarte, pero las productoras, las plantas de cervezas, 1 litro de cerveza se necesita 300 litros de agua, ¿no? Y entonces la Coca-Cola consume millones de litros de agua, que son de los pueblos originarios y tenemos que tener en cuenta eso de tener más conciencia de lo que consumimos. Y con eso los dejo y pues seguimos reflexionando desde las juventudes, qué mundo queremos, ¿no? O si nos dicen que somos el futuro, ¿qué futuro es la que estamos construyendo? Y eso es todo. Gracias.
Thank you. I have to say that I'm really getting emotional here because what I've just heard is really, really touching from all of you youth. And I really hope that we have some time to engage with what you said. But now I need to make sure that we have time to do the next thing that we are going to do. So I suggest we do it right now. So Cindy, please, can you tell us all that what we, and especially you as a primus motor, have been doing for whole spring? Thank you.
Thank you, Mari. And I agree, this has been an emotional conversation. So if you could please put the first page of the toolkit on the screen. Yes. I'll first start off by thanking all the members of the Ecumenical Indigenous Youth Network, which is made up of us and other members who are not able to join us today. And this toolkit, it's been a 3 months of work. We've been doing consultations with the members of the youth network and also our indigenous youth back at home in various regions, if it's Africa, the Pacific, and the rest of the regions. And the cover page is a photo from the first indigenous, not the first, but the Indigenous Youth Pre-Conference in Arusha in 2018. And this toolkit, the contents of the toolkit, I won't go into detail. It's available on the WCC website and also the app, so you can go and read more about it. Basically, the toolkit defines who are indigenous people. It also tells us, it defines the various definitions from various parts of the globe, if it's Africa, if it's Asia, if it's Latin America, and also tells us more about indigenous peoples and the land. Why is land important to indigenous people? And also, why are land rights important at this particular day and time? And also the indigenous land rights and indigenous youth, and the church and indigenous land rights, and also tells us about the case of Australia, which was a very interesting case, and the indigenous land rights and non-indigenous people, because this is not just a discussion for indigenous people, but also we need to have non-indigenous people on board. And also the next, we have 3 chapters. Then the second chapter goes on to talk about activism and advocacy. What can non-indigenous people like yourself do? And how can you be involved in activism and advocacy for indigenous people's land rights? And the final chapter suggests how to observe Ecumenical Indigenous Youth Day, the methodology, the suggested program of law, and the big event. And also the smaller events which will happen through August. This one you can go and practice once you go back to your various countries. And I'll briefly tell you the definition of who are indigenous people, for those who are not familiar with the term. And the term indigenous is often misunderstood and misinterpreted, especially in relation to regions such as Africa. In continents such as America and Australia, indigenous people is not a new concept. And during the colonial period, the term indigenous was used to describe all peoples living in colonized lands, whether they were natives or foreigners. And the term natives or original peoples and populations found on these lands were all used interchangeably: natives, original peoples, and native people and native peoples. And in other continents such as Europe and Arctic, the reference is made particular to the Article 1 of the ILO Convention 169, and an official definition for the term indigenous has not yet been defined, has not yet been adopted by any United Nations body, even in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I'll move on to the characteristics of indigenous people. Indigenous people, they have a historical connection to those who lived in a country or territory at the time when people or other ethnic origins arrived. So by this I mean when communities were migrating from one region to the other, the communities that you found on this land are the indigenous people. And they have strong connection to land, they have strong connection to territories and natural resources in the area. They each have their own set of social and economic, political and ideological systems. As we have heard from our panelists today, their systems are quite unique. And they also have their own language, culture, and religious beliefs, which is unfortunately disappearing, but we are all working hard to restore this language and culture and our religious beliefs. And for indigenous people, for the next subsection, indigenous people and land, this section basically breaks down how land is important to indigenous people, how it is the foundation of our culture. It is also a unifying element that binds all indigenous people all over the world. And indigenous people view land as the basis of their cultures, their spiritualities, their form. They also form the basis of their survival. So basically, when an indigenous person does not have any land, you can't survive, because from land you get your water, you get your food, and everything. And this chapter also it talks about most of the things have been said by my panelists, which is the green colonization, the climate emergency, the biodiversity, the rich biodiversity that is found in our land, and also how it has also affected us, our mental health. It has given us, we've been traumatized. Most of our elders are now dealing with stress and mental health issues because of the effects of the eviction, of the effects of all the problems that indigenous peoples are facing. And I'll move on to land rights, indigenous people and land rights, and how land rights is a cross-cutting problem to not just to basically our survival, it is a source of our livelihood. It is essential to our economic rights. It is, and it also reduces, when we have land rights, it reduces poverty. There's peace. There's crisis prevention, and also urban and rural planning is better. And there's less food shortages. There's the climate crisis. The solutions are found on this indigenous lands. And also that land rights means a spiritual and economic base, and the opportunity to once again become a self-determining people. So once you get land rights, you can be able to be, you get the right to self-determination as provided for in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Then I'll just read a quote from the Sami Church Council. regarding the development of wind power, the green colonization. We have been witnessing for a long time that grantors of permits have not adequately taken account of the legal status, customary rights, or needs of the Sami people. Thus, access to lands and natural resources as the material basis for Sami culture are not safeguarded. Despite the fact that Section 108 of the Constitution ought to safeguard these rights, the paragraph makes explicit the state's obligation to facilitate conditions for the Sami people to safeguard and develop their languages, their culture, and their social life. And the Sami people are lucky to have a constitution that speaks to them and speaks to their needs, and this is not the case in most parts of the world. Yeah. And I also read another quote from an anonymous person. Losing land can mean losing lives, because when you don't have land, you don't have a life. And also, I'll move on to the next subsection, which is Indigenous land rights and Indigenous youth. Indigenous youth need this land so that they can transfer this knowledge from their generation to the next generation, and to ensure that their history and culture remains rooted in themselves. And all these are found on land. And in many countries, such as India, among the Nagaland people, in the northeast of India, Indigenous land rights will affect Indigenous youth because they govern the customary laws. And the Indigenous people, when Indigenous people have no access to their land and natural resources, it affects other aspects of their lives, such as education, health, and socio-economic development. And this has been seen with the rural-urban migration. The young people are forced to leave their rural territories so they can go and get education elsewhere, simply because there are no hospitals, there are no schools nearby, and they end up leaving their homes and losing their identity. And Indigenous people are still not recognized in various parts of the world, and securing gives them the opportunity, and especially Indigenous youth, self-identification and self-determination. And now to the church and Indigenous land rights. History has proven that church can play a significant role in ensuring that land is taken back to the Indigenous people. And this is where we saw in Australia, where the church was, they had mission reserves or stations to help the Indigenous people who had been evicted, who had been dispossessed of their lands. And they're also able to help this community settle back in their territories. And that is why the church should seek reconciliation with Indigenous people in finding ways to ensure that their land is given back to their rightful owners. And the ministry is inspired by the prophets of Israel, who stood up for victims of land grabbing in the 8th and 9th centuries BC. And these prophets that we're talking about, the prophets of Israel, include Micah, Isaiah, and Hosea. And they revealed exploitation and corruption. The church also needs to take part in a process that encourages and enables individuals to voice their concerns without feeling threatened or intimidated, because most of these Indigenous communities are afraid of speaking out because they'll be either threatened, they're going to lose their lives, they'll end up living in hiding once they speak up. And also the church needs to be an ambassador of peace. The church needs to demonstrate that they can advocate for and partner with Indigenous people in ensuring that they regain back their land rights. And this is where I spoke about the case of Australia, where the church helped Indigenous people get back their land.
That's garbage.
Sorry?
I'm from Australia, that's garbage.
Okay, think we can discuss that. Yeah, we should. Yeah. Okay. And where is the indigenous land rights has been highlighted under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People under Article 3 and 10, where Article 3 and 10, which seeks to ensure that indigenous people have self-determination and rights to live on their land. And this has been provided for under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And also Article 4 builds on this article, and Article 10 addresses the rights of indigenous people to live on their lands. And the above articles are a point of reference for an indigenous or a non-indigenous person when addressing indigenous land rights. And what can indigenous people do? People like yourself who are non-indigenous, you can recognize and acknowledge the rich culture knowledge associated with land, respect the sentiments and emotions of indigenous people, and become the voice of the voiceless in indigenous lands and territories. And you should also learn from the good relationship with Mother Earth and nature that indigenous people maintain. You should also understand how crucially important land is to indigenous people's lives. And if this connection is broken and the land used for other purposes without consideration for its preservation, indigenous people will lose their culture and identity. And how can you be involved? You can raise awareness, you can create awareness, you can reflect on the traditional customary land laws. You can also advocate for an eco-friendly lifestyle. And you can also help teach young indigenous people the importance of protecting the land. And you can do this in various ways. You can do this via social media or in your churches. And also make sure that you're working with indigenous communities. And I will leave it there because the other section is speaking about the suggestion for observing the day, which is through webinars, which we are doing now because the session is being live streamed, and also through social media and the rest. And there's also a song at the very bottom. Maybe Mari can lead us later if there's time. And there's also prayers. We have prayers, the Lord's Prayer in various languages at the very last pages. Yeah. Thank you, Mari.
Thank you, Cindy. First of all, why did we want to launch this toolkit? It's because also here in Karlsruhe, when I'm eating dinner, when I'm eating lunch, when I'm having a coffee break, I'm always educating. And people are always saying that there's not enough information available about indigenous issues. And I think that this is the case. And this toolkit is not an answer for everything. This is just some kind of a starting point, some sort of a toolkit that you can all read. You can go and see it from the WCC web pages, and please do so. It's a huge privilege that our voices of indigenous youth can be heard here in Karlsruhe on International Youth Day. And it's a huge privilege for us that we were able to do this toolkit. Thank you, Cindy, and our speakers. I'm now giving a possibility to engage with them, and I need to prioritize because we don't have that much time, unfortunately. So I prioritize youth. So if you want to engage or ask something, please. Thank you.
Hi, I am Abel, Indonesian Reform Judge from Indonesia. I have two questions, those two questions to all of the presenters. And the first question might touch your red button, but I think it is needed because we want to hear and we want to address the specific issue. So In terms of privatization of lands, land acquisitions, right of lands and everything, we tend to hear from the capital power that bringing all those capitalistic mechanisms, bringing all those industries to our land will bring more jobs, will bring more generous development to the people. So what do you think about it to answer that issues? And the second question is that from all the presentations, I hear that the, the most proposed solution to keep the integrity of land is that young people should keep the richness of traditions and customs of the indigenous community. How do you respond to the fact that most of the youth community, I think, across the globe now are interested more to the popular culture? It happens also in my place, even though I'm not from West Papua, but I went there 2 months and I see also a little bit, especially in the coastal area, and happened also in my place in Java Island. People in young generation are close to the popular culture through their phone, through Netflix, through everything. So how do you respond to that? Thank you.
I'm gonna give the first question to Eleazar, if you could answer for that, the first question about the capitalism, and the second one for Sarah, and please be brief.
La primera pregunta es que todas las empresas que llegan a despojar en los territorios del sur no dejan, solo sí dejan muchos daños hacia la tierra, ¿no? Despojo, no es que el concepto de que llegan a las comunidades que va a traer desarrollo, va a traer bienestar, va a traer muchas cosas buenas, pero la realidad solo trae muerte como tal, muerte. Y entonces no hay, el concepto de prosperidad pues solo es para el capitalismo, nunca es para las personas.
So for the second question, what I'm seeing in Sami community, it's quite the opposite. Sami youth are engaging with elderly people, trying to seek the knowledge, the traditional knowledge. They are now wanting to make our dresses and make our handicrafts themselves. I don't see that as a problem in Sami community. Yeah, and they do it in social media also. You can follow those accounts. There are many. So I see that the youth are seeking for their indigenous cultures, back to their cultures. So, yeah.
I'm seeing one hand there. We only have minutes, so please stand up.
Stand up. Sorry, can you pass?
So, yeah, quickly, do you see any parallels between your indigenous ideas of ownership and relation to the land and those in Leviticus, which also have a kind of communal, customary, reciprocal element, and what can Christians more broadly maybe learn from that?
Can you kindly repeat the question? Yeah, just in a sentence.
Yes, so do you see parallels between indigenous understandings of relationship with the land with what we read in Leviticus, which seems to me to have some parallels, and what can Christians learn from this in non-indigenous contexts?
Yeah, I think there are some relationship aspects, and as Christians, I think it is important that we uphold the idea of stewardship, where we are to take care of the land, because land signifies, in our context, it signifies our identity, our culture, and we have all our things are revolved around land. So as Christians, I think it always goes back to the idea of a stewardship, where we have to take care of God's creation and where everything revolve around it. Yeah.
Okay, I guess that was the last question because don't, unfortunately, we don't have any more time left. But at this moment, I want to thank you, the audience, also here in Karlsruhe, but also online. And most of all, I want to thank you, our Indigenous youth. Thank you for your contributions.